Thank you.
To move the motion. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I should just like to remind members present, just before the adjournment, I was talking about the fairness of the specifics of the Dorset Council Revenue Support Grant. For the last 3 years, we have received in Dorset exactly 0 revenue support grant. This year is the first since my election that we have received any form of revenue support grant, although a slim £654,000, that equates to roughly just 0.2% of total council income. And whilst welcomed, this is only after I and others have spent a long time banging the drum for this situation to change, and I'm afraid is somewhat overshadowed still by the £24 million that, for example, Wandsworth Borough and I know other boroughs receive. But on the other hand, I should be delighted to give way to the honourable gentleman.
For being such an assiduous MP for his constituency, which he quite clearly is, he's outlining the issue in relation to pressure and the rising cost of living. Councils are finding it increasingly difficult to make the books balance, and government, I believe, must consider increasing the grants to ensure that the basic service for level provision is in place and basic services are maintained, and that the parity of grant, which the honourable gentleman is referring to, is the same right across the whole of the United Kingdom, where deprivation in the honourable gentleman's area and constituency is the same in other parts.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention? I'd agree with him that deprivation affects all parts of the United Kingdom, not just urban areas, but rural areas, and indeed all 4 nations of the United Kingdom too. But, Sir Mark, I would just like to recount that local councillors in Dorset, despite us benefiting from the £654,000 in revenue support grant, they have also made me aware that whilst we have finally received a positive revenue support grant contribution, that other government grants have indeed been reduced by a broadly similar value, which has meant that really the council is a little better off in real terms. It is clear, therefore, that the way that local government finances and the revenue support grant is calculated and delivered is in need of urgent review. Unlike others, I'm not looking for favour or preference for Dorset, or indeed West Dorset, but I am looking for fairness. The average age in rural Dorset is much higher than almost anywhere in the UK. A third of the community are aged over 65, compared to an average of just 19% in England and just 10% in some London boroughs. This, alongside rising special educational needs and disabilities for young children, means that 69% of Dorset Council revenue is spent on social care. Since 2010-11, there has been a 25% rise in those aged between 65 and 84 in Dorset, and a 20% increase in those aged over 85, with, of course, the associated social care needs. This changing demographic has caused the council spend to change dramatically, with adult social care seeing its net spend in Dorset increase by 15% to £139 million, and children's social care spending increased by almost 25% between 2010-11 and 2019-20 to over £60 million, and yet the funding structure has fundamentally still not changed. Care of adults and children is an obvious council priority, and owing to internal migration increasing average age, this service has seen more and more of the council's budget in recent years. This has, of course, resulted in cuts elsewhere, as spending on planning, development, culture, environment and regulatory services and highways and transport all have seen reductions in net spend over the same period to facilitate the priority of adult and child social care. The last, highways and transport that is, has been reduced by more than half over the last 10 years. This is only too evident as Dorset is also home to the worst frequency rail line in the country, the line between Yeovil, Dorchester, the county town and Weymouth, with, if you're lucky, a train at best every 3 hours. Buses have also been impacted, with Dorset Council having to spend their already tightened pool of transport resources on taking over vital community service routes with commercial operators that have pulled out. Concessionary bus passes, while appearing to be good, actually result in a scheme where operators receive 92 pence from a £6.50 single fare, making many routes commercially unviable and, paradoxically, actually reducing bus services in rural Dorset, which cuts off elderly communities from essential health and community services, the very groups of people that are meant to benefit from the concessionary passes. The young in West Dorset are also impacted by the inequalities in funding for transport. And whilst I recognise that transport provision is often the responsibility of the Department for Transport, because of the situation that we are in and the local government funding that's allocated to it, is why I'm bringing this issue here today. Because whilst children throughout London enjoy the perks of free bus and tram travel to go to school or to see their friends, the parents of children in West Dorset are faced with further financial obstacles, with some school bus passes costing over £600 just for their child's daily travel to and from their place of learning if you're at sixth form or college. A 17-year-old living in Dorset will have to find a way to pay to get to their sixth form, college or apprenticeship. A similar 17-year-old living in a London borough will not, thanks to the 16 to 18 bus pass. Part of the funding for London, of course, is included in that. And it's also worth noting that per passenger journey in London, TfL receives 10 times the amount of public funding than we do in Dorset. This refusal to give Dorset its fair share in relation to its population and characteristics continues to push the elderly into increasing isolation, and for me as their MP is an increasing concern. And of course it also places obstacles in the way of our bright young minds, all while residents and small businesses continue to buckle under the ever high rates of council tax. It is time that Dorset received its fair share of government investment and funding, and that my ministerial colleagues and my honourable friend here can take the opportunity coming forward to show that the South West is just as important to the levelling up agenda as the North East, or indeed other parts of the United Kingdom. This need is especially pronounced following the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, during which, I'm afraid to say, in West Dorset, we lost some 20% of our businesses during the COVID pandemic. A very topical subject recently being debated, of course, is around the country is around the funding for emergency services. But here too we see detrimental impacts that the government's need to treat Dorset fairly is still having. My own constituency and those surrounding it continue to face the blight of difficult county lines drug gangs. Dorset Police's resources are pushed to breaking point during the summer months, especially when the county's population trebles with holidaymakers and day trippers. Dorset is the 6th most popular region in the country for visitor trips during the summer. But these can sometimes stretch those resources, and whilst I understand the Minister can't today answer for the Home Office, I would like to ask the Minister to note this part of the difficulty we face. I recognise these matters of policing are with the Home Office, but I wonder if my honourable friend, in concluding my remarks, could consider the points which I raised at the beginning of this debate, and I would just like to refresh everyone's memory as to what they are. Why is levelling up not focused on rural areas in the same way that it is for urban areas? Why does rural hardship not seem to matter in the same way that urban poverty does? Why does Dorset Council have to raise 85% of its funds through council tax when the national average is 50% and some urban locations even less? Why is it deemed acceptable to put financial obstacles in the way of access to rural education but remove them for urban education? Why does Transport for London get £1.7 billion of government money when needed, yet Dorset Council gets hardly anything? Why, despite known patterns of domestic migration, does the cost burden of rural social care get placed on the rural community locally, but other communities can get help? Why does Dorset receive such low levels of the revenue support grant, whilst in inner London there are boroughs which charge very low rates of council tax comparatively and which are furnished with tens of millions of pounds of government grants? So, Mark, in short, it is my intention with this debate today for the House to consider two central points. Firstly, for rural Britain, but specifically rural Dorset and my own constituency of West Dorset, to finally receive its fair share of government local authority to support. For too long has Dorset been overlooked in the allocation of RSG payments, and for too long has council tax needed to cover the deficit. It is time that services in Dorset saw adequate funding so that they can continue to work in the way that they need to support rural and coastal communities. And finally, as I continue to relentlessly champion the needs of West Dorset in advocating for fairness across the board, I believe that the whole system of revenue support grants needs to be examined by the government and for necessary reforms to take place so that local authorities like Dorset Council receive their fair share of government funding and support to enable us to thrive.
Okay, thank you. The question is that this House has considered council tax and